Hello, my friends. We're back, and we're going to do some continuing conversation on a Mike Winger video. You might know Mike Winger. He is a he's a theologian. He is an apologist. He's a Bible studier. He's got a website called BibleThinker.org, and he does amazing work on YouTube. He's got tons of subscribers and all that stuff. And he was at a question and answer. You see all the question marks. He was at a question and answer at a church, and he got this question: my husband is addicted to porn. Should I divorce him? And he said a lot of good stuff. We're going to react to this a little bit, and then we're going to watch about a minute of the clip, and then we're going to answer two questions that I think didn't get answered that really they hit me when I was going through it. But some of the things that he said first, before we dive into those questions and watch the video, is one thing that he said is that women who are struggling with this, they really need to find counsel, and I agree with him absolutely. You need to find people who love Jesus, who are going to give you good advice, who are going to speak into your life in a healthy way. And then he also mentioned that ladies, you can confront and demand change, which I think is absolutely true. As a matter of fact, I think it's the role of a loving wife, a responsible wife, a caring wife, to confront and demand change. So yeah, that's great. He also made a mention, kind of one of the throwdown moments he had was that godliness makes your life so simple, and that's really true. It's like it doesn't necessarily make it easy, but it does make it simple in the sense that we know what to do about things. You know, if you refrain from sin, it's difficult to refrain from sin, but it makes your paths straight, doesn't it? Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And the last thing he said, which I couldn't agree with more, is the more you only have your spouse for sexual fulfillment, the more fulfilled you will be with that. And I adore that statement. I see it all the time in guys that go from, extremely sexually addicted to they start to focus only on being fulfilled by their spouse. And over time, they just develop this deep love for her. Their internal shift around and start to want only her. And of course, it's way complicated, when you've got addiction past and that sort of thing. But it does change. Your interior changes to love only your spouse and want only for your spouse. So that's pretty cool. So let's dive in here. We're gonna watch about a minute of this answer that he gives to that question. My husband's addicted to porn. Should I divorce him? And then we'll have some comments afterwards with those two questions that really jumped out to me that I don't think he answered in this video. So let's see.
What do you do? Because a lot of people will say, my husband's not a Christian, he's addicted to porn, I want out of the marriage. Does this give me an option to do that? So how about that one?
So this is a challenging question, partly because what we have with our cell phones right now did not exist for most of humanity, right? It's certainly not in the first century. So there's no direct addressing of this kind of, there's no OnlyFans that Jesus can talk to the disciples about. So it doesn't come up, but there is looking to lust, but we have to grant that pornography is a step beyond just looking to lust. And then there's actual physical adultery, and we should all grant that pornography isn't actual physical adultery. But where is it on the spectrum between these two things? That's really challenging. So, super tough question. And when you consider rates of pornography use in our culture, if your answer to this question is porn use justifies divorce, you have to just step back and say, I am honestly legitimizing mass divorce. Maybe I'm right, but let me be real about the consequences, right? Because you have to ask yourself, if I'm wrong, how much will it cost?
That is powerful stuff. Man, I love Mike's intentional working through the dynamics between things. He's like, we can't call porn physical adultery. We also can't just call it lust of the heart. It sits somewhere in the middle, and I appreciate that. I also appreciate the recognition of the dramatic impact that this will have on so many people, particularly if we use the definition lust is adultery. Then, man, anybody can get divorced. Just anybody can. So that's some good stuff. So there were two questions that came out of that for me that really struck me, and I think need to be answered. Mike never really answered the question of should you or should you not get divorced. He does make the answer later on that it depends essentially, on how much pornography usage and what kind of usage and that sort of thing, and that's a very difficult thing to work through. But here's the first question that I thought really presented itself that never got answered, and it's this: does grounds for divorce mean you should divorce? Like, okay, adultery is the thing that Jesus says is the one thing that we can divorce for, but does that mean that if my spouse commits adultery, I should automatically divorce them? Now, I actually believe the answer is no, and I'll tell you why. And we get a picture of this. I'm going to give you two pictures of Jesus' heart towards this. The first one, we're going to go Old Testament. We're going to Ezekiel 16. And this is, I'll admit, an allegorical connection. But in Ezekiel 16, it's talking about God's judgment on Israel who's been unfaithful to him. And the reason I chose this is because it uses tons of adultery language. God calls Israel a harlot over and over and over again. You've been whoring around with these people and whoring around with the Sumerians and the Chaldeans and all of this sort of thing. And what we see is that God lays out the reality of the wrath of God that is going to fall on them, a righteous judgment. I'm not going to read Ezekiel 16 because it's so huge. We will read the second one. But he just says this just judgment is going to come down on you, and that's where it's at. That's the consequence of what you have done by being adulterous. And that's really intense. But then at the end of chapter 16, it's like God can't stay away from it too long. He ends with, "But I will remember the covenant I made with you in your youth." What's so crazy to me about that is that even right after judgment, God is coming back around and saying, "But I will bring you back to me." He's like, I will bring you back. I will call you back. I will restore you to a relationship. And I think that's a really powerful just indicator of God's heart about these kinds of things. Should I, if I find out that my spouse has been looking at pornography and I now have grounds, let's say that does constitute grounds for divorce, like, do I now have to divorce them? I don't think so at all. I think it's in God's heart that not be so. And I want to go to one more passage to kind of example this, and you may know where I'm going with this already. In John chapter 7, it's the very last verse of John chapter 7, into 8, we get the story of the woman caught in adultery. And I'll read this one. It says, "Early in the morning, he, Jesus, came again to the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. So what do you say?' Now, funnily enough, the law actually says that she and the dude she was doing it with should be stoned, but I wonder where that guy is, right? Anyway, so starting at verse 6, it continues. "This they said to test Jesus, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, 'Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her.' And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, 'Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?' She said, 'No one, Lord.' And Jesus said, 'Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more.'" I love this story because it is such a beautiful example of what Jesus' heart is. His heart is for redemption. His heart is for forgiveness. His heart is for certainly not, don't keep sinning. Don't keep doing that. That's a bad idea. But there is forgiveness. I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not going to do it. It's a beautiful picture of his heart to restore people. Okay, so I think you get the point there. On the background of this question, and the background of this question is kind of like, what is the mindset of God? The mindset of God is one of redemption. And I think that we need to take that very seriously as we are working with these very difficult problems. Redemption has to play. And many churches, they go way too far in making cut and dry, laws about how this will function within their church, and they end up hurting a lot of people in a way that God would not. Not just bringing boundaries, not just bringing good judgment, but bringing punishment, condemnation, increasing shame, things like that. Okay, so I think, if you have grounds for divorce, should you automatically divorce? I don't think so. I think that there's a huge benefit, a huge realm of redemption where you can gain a lot of beautiful spiritual things through forgiveness and restoration and that sort of thing. Although I will admit, sometimes judgment, sometimes consequences are the very thing needed to create redemption. See, redemption plays either way. All right, let's move on. The second question that didn't come up, or he never answered directly, was, is porn use adultery? And he talked more about the question of, like, is the idea of lust of the heart adultery? Well, let's talk about porn use in particular. And just follow me here for a second. So the most classic understanding of adultery is having sex with someone who is not your spouse. This culminates in the most physical bonding experience that two people can have with one another. Porn mimics that, as most people who watch porn will masturbate to it for a sexual release. The visual component is there, and the bonding component is there. So there's kind of like three components to, this. You've got the visual component, the image of the other person. And then you've got the physical body of the other person, and then you've got the bonding component, the physical oneness component that happens. And in pornography, two of those are present. Right? We've got the bonding and the visual component. So the component of the other person is not there, although let's be real, people are working tirelessly to find ways to bring in a component of a physical body as well. We're trying harder and harder to simulate that full sexual experience even without another person. And so what's happening here is that the metaphor of God's unity, the way that God built unity into our physical bodies, is being broken. The sacred nature of sexuality is being broken with pornography. And I would say that that's exactly what adultery does too. Adultery, it breaks the sacred nature of unity that you have with your spouse. And so does porn use, because you are bonding with something else. Men develop addictions to their computer, to a screen. They bond with a physical thing, whether they like it or not. They'll bond with what's there, and it's crazy. I mean, it's really, really tough. And so, in my mind, in some sense, we're accepting, like, having adultery would be like one step removed from proper, right? A different person. Now, not just do we have a different person, but we also have this mechanized system, and we're dropping the physical body aspect. To me, in some ways, pornography is even more adultery than adultery because of that breaking of the sacred nature that's built into the unity that happens between our physical bodies. So I would say that pornography is adultery. It is not classic physical adultery because there's not another body there necessarily, but it does break that sacred metaphor of unity that God gave us sexuality for. The bonding happens, the culminating act happens with the use of pornography. And even if we take away the masturbation element, all of those hormones and things are still released. As we sit and lust over people, all of that stuff is still happening. The fact that we don't have the massive orgasmic burst if we don't masturbate doesn't mean that we won't get bonded to the things that we're looking at. So there's some thoughts for you guys. I hope that you enjoyed listening to that. If you have any questions, put them in the questions below. The comments below. There we go. Think of the word. Put them in the comments below. Let me know what you're thinking about, and I hope to be able to talk to you about them and engage in all of that. If you need any help with sexual addiction, check me out at warfareofgrace.com. You can get all that in the description as well, and I will put Mike's video, the whole response, down, a link to that video down in the comments or the description as well. You are loved. Have a great evening. Bye.